Kayla had always been a child full of energy, curiosity, and wonder. Since the time she was very young, her parents had often remarked that she seemed to have an innate connection with nature, with a particular love for animals. She could spend hours observing the creatures that lived in their neighborhood, the playful rabbits that hopped along the grass, the birds that flitted from tree to tree, and the squirrels that seemed to always be in motion, their tails flicking as they scurried up the trunks of towering trees. Kayla's fascination with the animal world knew no bounds, and she would always take the time to gently observe them, learning their ways and trying to understand what they needed. Erica and Nathan, her parents, had always supported Kayla's love for animals. They knew it wasn't just a passing phase, it was a deep, empathetic bond that their daughter had with the world around her. They often found her speaking softly to the birds in their backyard, her words a mixture of whispers and giggles, as if she understood their language. She would stop to help a ladybug find its way back to a tree, or gently hold out her hand to a cat in the neighborhood, coaxing it closer with a soft voice. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. There was something almost magical about Kayla's ability to communicate with animals, as though they were drawn to her kindness and sincerity. Kayla's love for animals went beyond simple curiosity. She often went out of her way to make sure the creatures in her yard were comfortable, safe, and well fed. She would place birdseed in the feeders that hung from the trees, ensure the squirrels had enough acres to snack on, and sometimes even leave small pieces of cheese out for the stray cats that wandered through. It was a ritual that she carried out with devotion, always making sure that no creature went hungry. But it wasn't just the animals in her yard that captured her attention. Kayla was always on the lookout for new friends, whether they were the chipmunks that darted across the street or the butterflies that fluttered past her in the garden. She believed that every creature deserved love and care, no matter how small or fleeting. Her heart was big enough to encompass them all, and this love for the world around her grew stronger with each passing day. On one particularly cold winter afternoon, when the first snow of the season had covered the ground, Kayla's excitement knew no bounds. She had been waiting for the snow, anticipating the day she could finally run out into the yard and feel the soft powder crunch beneath her boots. As soon as she saw the white blanket covering the earth outside, she rushed to the door, her heart racing with anticipation. The world outside was completely transformed. The trees were heavy with snow, their branches bending under the weight of it. The ground was covered in a thick layer of fresh snow that sparkled like diamonds in the weak afternoon sun. It was a winter wonderland, and Kayla couldn't wait to explore it. She dashed into her room to put on her warmest clothes. Her red scarf, knitted by her grandmother, was the first thing she grabbed. She loved how soft it was, and it made her feel safe. Her coat, a thick and cozy puffer jacket, was next, followed by her mittens and boots. Once she was all bundled up, she opened the door to the cold air and ran outside, laughing as she spun in circles, her arms outstretched like a bird ready to take flight. Her cheeks turned rosy from the chill, but she didn't care. She was in her element, surrounded by the beauty of the winter landscape. Kayla's laughter echoed in the yard as she danced in the snow, making snow angels and throwing snowballs at the air, watching them explode into a burst of white as they landed. It was a peaceful afternoon, with only the sound of her laughter and the crunching of the snow beneath her boots breaking the stillness. She loved the quiet, the way the world seemed to slow down when the snow fell. It made her feel as though she were part of something bigger, something timeless. But as she wandered further into the yard, something caught her eye. Near the edge of the fence, just beyond where the snow had settled into perfect smoothness, she saw a trail of small, delicate footprints. At first, she thought it was just another animal, maybe a rabbit or a squirrel, but something about the tracks felt different. They were too tiny, too fragile. She crouched down, her breath coming out in little puffs of steam as she examined the tracks more closely. There were small indentations in the snow, almost like tiny paws, but they didn't seem quite right. The tracks were shallow, and they didn't lead anywhere obvious. They seemed to disappear into the white expanse of snow. Kayla's heart skipped a beat as she followed the trail, her curiosity driving her forward. She moved carefully, stepping lightly on the snow as she tried not to disturb the footprints. As she got closer to the edge of the yard, she saw something that made her blood run cold. There, nestled in the snow, were tiny creatures, perhaps a half dozen of them, huddled together for warmth. They were shivering, their small bodies trembling from the cold. Their fur was patchy, their eyes tightly shut. Kayla's heart clenched as she realized that the creatures were barely alive. They were so small, so fragile, and they needed help immediately. "Oh no," Kayla whispered to herself, her voice filled with panic. "What happened to you?" Without thinking, she gently scooped them up, one by one, cradling them carefully in her hands. They were so light, so delicate. She wrapped them in her scarf, hoping the warmth of the fabric would help them. But as she looked down at them, she realized just how helpless they were. They were so tiny, no bigger than the palm of her hand, and they were shivering uncontrollably. Kayla's chest tightened with fear. The snow was falling heavily now, and there was no way these little creatures could survive out in the cold. They needed warmth, care, and protection, and Kayla knew she had to do something fast. She moved quickly, her mind racing as she carried the tiny creatures toward the house. She barely felt the cold against her skin. All she could think about was getting them inside where it was warm. The door was in sight, and she could feel the weight of the creatures in her hands, fragile and vulnerable. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her way up the steps to the door, her breath coming in sharp, anxious gasps. She had no idea what these creatures were or what they needed, but she couldn't leave them outside. She couldn't bear the thought of them dying in the snow. Once inside, she hurried up the stairs to her room, taking care not to jostle the little animals as she moved. Her hands trembled as she gently placed them on her bed, arranging them as carefully as she could. She wrapped them in her softest blanket, the one she always used when she was feeling sad or scared, hoping that it would offer them some comfort. She felt so powerless, so small in the face of their fragility, but she refused to give up on them. She couldn't. She wouldn't. Kayla sat beside them for hours, her eyes never leaving the tiny creatures as she waited for them to stir, to show some sign that they were still alive. She whispered to them softly, telling them that they were safe now, that she would take care of them. She didn't know if they could hear her, but it made her feel a little better to speak to them. She just wanted them to survive. She didn't know what else to do. After a while, her mother, Erica, came upstairs to check on her. She had noticed how quiet Kayla had been and felt a pang of concern. When she opened the door to Kayla's room, she found her sitting by the bed, her face pale with worry, her eyes fixed on the tiny creatures. Erica's heart softened as she approached her daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sweetie," Erica said softly, her voice full of compassion. "What's going on?" Kayla's voice trembled as she explained, her words rushed and filled with emotion. "I found them outside, Mom. They were alone in the snow, and I couldn't leave them there. They're so small, and I don't know what to do. They won't eat, and they're so cold." Kayla's voice broke as she spoke, and tears welled up in her eyes. She felt helpless, unsure if she could save them. Erica knelt down beside her, wrapping her arms around her daughter in embrace. She knew how deeply Kayla cared for the animals, and her heart ached seeing her so distressed. "You've done everything you can, sweetie," Erica said gently. "You've brought them inside, kept them warm, and tried to care for them. But maybe it's time to get some help." Kayla looked up at her mother, her tear-filled eyes full of uncertainty. "But what if they don't make it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We'll make sure they get the care they need," Erica reassured her. "I'll call the Wildlife Rescue Center. They know exactly what to do." Kayla nodded, wiping her eyes. She wasn't ready to let the creatures go, but she knew that her mom was right. Sometimes, even when you cared so deeply, it was important to ask for help when things were beyond your control. The rescue center was able to take the creatures in, providing them with the care and warmth they needed to survive. It was a relief for Kayla to know they were in good hands, but it was also a reminder that sometimes helping wasn't about being able to fix everything on your own. It was about recognizing when something was beyond your ability and knowing when to ask for help. That winter, Kayla learned an important lesson about compassion and responsibility. She knew she couldn't save every creature, but she also understood that every effort mattered. The experience deepened her connection to animals and reinforced her commitment to doing what she could to help. Every life, no matter how small, was worth caring for. As time passed, Kayla became more involved in volunteer work at the local animal shelter, doing what she could to assist animals in need. Her love for animals had always been deep, but this experience with the tiny creatures in the snow transformed her compassion into action. She understood now that, even in the darkest times, there was always something she could do to make a difference.